Pivot tables are powerful. Pivot tables allow you to organize, filter, summarize, and analyze raw data. A pivot table is like a layer that sits on top of the raw data set. A good data structure has variables or the numerical measurements as column headings and observations or descriptive categories as row headings. The table should not include calculated fields. To insert a pivot table, select any cell within the data source table. Click Insert, Pivot Table. It selects the entire table. If we scroll down, we see that all the way to R3726 is selected. We're going to cancel that. Now another way to do that is if you click the top leftmost cell and press Control Shift, right arrow and down arrow, and then Insert Pivot Table, it will select the entire table again, A1 through R3726. Choose where you want the pivot table report to be placed. You can place it in the existing worksheet, or what's preferable is to create a new worksheet, so I've selected that. And then check to make sure Add this table to the data model is unchecked. We don't want to use that at this point. And then I will click OK. Okay, we arrive at the pivot table fields. If you do not have the pivot table fields visible, you click Analyze and then Field List. So Analyze Field List will toggle it on or off. So now I'm looking at my pivot table fields. The pivot table fields show all the variables within your data set and which ones are currently included within the pivot. If there are fields you want to use to filter your entire data set, you would drag them into the filters box. Variables that are included within rows will appear as individual rows within your pivot. Fields that are included within columns will appear as individual columns within your pivot. Numerical measurements such as revenue, budget, income should be included within the sigma values box. So let's give an example. If we pulled states into rows, we would have 50 rows spanning across rows, and we would have one column. If instead we pulled states into columns, we would have 50 columns and one row. If we were instead looking at state population, which box would it go in? It would go in the sigma values box because state population is a numeric measurement. So let's try something a little different. Okay, we're interested in the titles of our IMDb database. So we will pull titles into our rows. And we're thinking, we're interested in looking at the revenues of all our films. So we locate revenue, gross revenue, and we will pull that into the sigma values because it's a numeric variable. Okay, now we have the titles and we have revenue. Very good. Notice once again that the films are, because they're descriptive, because they're qualitative values, they are spanning the rows rather than the columns. Okay, very good. Okay, let's try something slightly different. Okay, we're interested in films in Australia and a specific group of films in Australia. So how do we start? Okay, we're looking at films, so that would be title. So we click on title and we make sure that title shows up within the rows. Very good. Okay, we're interested in looking at gross revenue. So we're going to click on gross revenue. And we confirm that gross revenue is in the correct box, sigma values, because it's a numeric value. Okay, we want to look at Australia. So how do we only look at Australia? What we would do is we would take country and we pull that into filters. And then we'd come up here and we would click this drop down and select Australia. Now, because we filtered out all the other countries, we're only looking at Australian films. Okay, we want to be even more specific than that. I've always wondered, are there films produced in Australia that are in the Aboriginal language? So what we will do is we will filter on language, and then we will click this drop down and select Aboriginal. So notice the list of films that we have here. Now when we click OK, we are filtering out films made in Australia that are only produced in Aboriginal language. Notice there is only one listed in the IMDb database, Rabbit Proof Fence. I've actually seen that film, but it was produced in Aboriginal language, and the gross revenue, I'm going to format this, was $6,165,429, and the grand total for the film is the same grand total, $6,165,429. I have one tip that might be helpful. When I first learned this, the PivotTable fields would disappear, and I had no idea why. Notice what happens when I click outside of my pivot table. The fields list disappears. Now, how do I get the field list back? What I do is I click inside the pivot table. And when I click inside the pivot table, the pivot field list will reappear. So if the field list disappears, think, where have I selected? What cell have I selected? So if you select within the pivot, the field list reappears. So that is the field list. It is amazing. This is an incredibly powerful function, and I love it. It's awesome. Thank you.